Behind the massive walls of the Vatican lie secrets that could overturn the beliefs of millions of Catholics. For centuries, popes dressed in sacred robes committed crimes that were carefully erased from official history. Financial fraud involving the mafia, harboring Nazi criminals, systematic concealment of pedophilia, mysterious murders of undesirables. These are not Hollywood scenarios but documented facts. Those who tried to tell the truth paid for it with their lives. Today, we will lift the veil on the forbidden pages of papal history that the Vatican is afraid to show the world. If you are shocked by these revelations about the dark side of the Vatican, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Every week, we reveal secrets that those in power want to hide from the public. Now, here's a question for discussion in the comments. Do you think the modern Vatican is capable of completely cleansing itself of the corruption and crimes of the past? Or is the system too deeply corrupt to change? Share your opinion. Behind the massive walls of the Vatican's secret archives lie millions of documents covering more than 12 centuries of Catholic Church history. Officially, these documents are available to researchers, but there is a special category of materials that are not discussed openly. These papers are either securely hidden in special storage facilities or irretrievably destroyed. What exactly is the Vatican hiding from the world? And why do some pages of papal history remain off-limits? The system of control over historical documents in the Vatican has developed over centuries. As early as the early Middle Ages, popes understood the importance of information management. Each pontiff had his own chroniclers, who recorded the events of his reign. However, these records were carefully edited, and undesirable fragments simply disappeared. An official version of history was created, which was supposed to present the Church in the best light. In the 13th century, Pope Innocent III created a special structure for systematizing archival documents. It was then that the first restrictions on access to certain materials appeared. Documents containing compromising information about popes and senior church hierarchs were marked with special signs and placed in separate storage facilities. Only selected cardinals bound by an oath of silence had access to them. The process of filtering historical information intensified during the Counter-Reformation of the 16th century. The Church faced a Protestant challenge, and any facts that could be used against Catholicism were ruthlessly destroyed. Special commissions studied archival documents, identifying dangerous materials. Many testimonies of crimes and abuses of papal power were burned during those years. In the 19th century, when historical science became more systematic, the Vatican developed a complex system for classifying documents. Categories of secrecy appeared, determining the terms for closing materials. Some documents were closed for 50 years, others for 75. But there was also a special category, materials that were never to be declassified. It is these documents that contain the most compromising evidence. Contemporary historians who have gained access to the Vatican archives note strange gaps in the documentary collection. Entire periods of papal history are represented extremely sparingly. This is especially true of the era of the so-called pornocracy, the period of the 10th century when Roman aristocratic families effectively controlled the election of popes. Documents from this time have either been lost or deliberately removed from public access. Witnesses who worked in the secret archives tell of the existence of underground rooms where highly classified materials are stored. There are no tours there, and even researchers with the highest clearance levels cannot enter. According to unofficial sources, these rooms contain documents revealing the involvement of popes in political assassinations, financial fraud, and links to criminal organizations. Of particular interest are documents relating to the Vatican's financial transactions in the 20th century. The Holy See's banking activities have always been shrouded in secrecy, but some leaks indicate links to organized crime and money laundering. Attempts to investigate these facts have invariably been met with a wall of silence. Journalists who tried to penetrate these secrets were threatened or mysteriously died. The Vatican officially opened access to the archives of Pius XII's pontificate only in 2020, almost 80 years after the end of his reign. And even this publication was selective. Many documents remained closed. Researchers have found numerous traces of materials being removed and individual pages rewritten. What exactly is the Church hiding about this Pope's role in World War II? There is also a practice of creating alternative documents. When the original materials contain too much compromising information, edited copies are created and made publicly available. The originals are either destroyed or hidden in secret storage facilities. This practice allows the Vatican to control the historical narrative, creating a convenient version of the past. Insiders from Vatican circles report the existence of a special unit dedicated to monitoring historical research. When a scholar approaches dangerous topics, pressure mechanisms are activated. This can take the form of denial of access to archives, pressure through academic institutions, or even direct threats. The Church has no intention of allowing all its secrets to be revealed. But why is the Vatican so afraid of historical truth? The answer is simple. Full disclosure of all the facts could undermine the moral authority of the Church, accumulated over centuries. If believers learn about the scale of crimes and abuses committed by popes, it could trigger a new crisis of confidence. Therefore, control over the historical narrative remains one of the priorities of Vatican policy. Documents that have managed to leak out of the secret archives paint a picture that is radically different from the official history of the papacy. They show the pontiffs not as holy representatives of God on earth, but as politicians, schemers, and sometimes even criminals who use their sacred office to achieve power and wealth. But how deep does this dark side of papal history go? Among all the pontiffs who have occupied St. Peter's throne, the name of Rodrigo Borgia, known as Pope Alexander VI, stands out with a particular darkness. His reign from 1492 to 1503 became the embodiment of how far a man clothed in papal robes could go in pursuit of power. Official church history tries to downplay the scale of his crimes, but surviving documents paint a portrait of a true villain in a tiara. Rodrigo Borgia was born in 1431 in the Spanish city of Jativa. His rise to the papal throne began thanks to nepotism. His uncle Alonso Borgia became Pope Calixtus III and immediately made his nephew a cardinal. Rodrigo was only 25 years old when he received his cardinal's hat, completely lacking the spiritual requirements for this office. But money and family connections meant more than piety. Rodrigo paved his way to the papal throne with gold. At the conclave of 1492, he openly bribed the cardinals, promising them lucrative positions and huge sums of money. The Venetian ambassador wrote that Borgia made promises left and right, sparing no expense. When white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel, announcing the election of the new pope, many in Rome understood that a man had ascended to the throne for whom the sacred office was merely an instrument of power. Alexander VI's personal life was scandalous even by the standards of the time. He had many mistresses, and he had 4 recognized children with Vanozza Catanei: Cesare, Giovanni, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey. There were also rumors of other illegitimate offspring. The Pope openly lived with his mistresses in the Vatican, throwing lavish parties that were more like orgies than gatherings befitting the head of the Church. The most sinister figure in Alexander's entourage was his son, Cesare Borgia. The Pope made him a cardinal at the age of 18, but Cesare soon resigned his position to become a military leader and secular ruler. Under his father's protection, he unleashed a series of wars in Romagna, capturing cities and killing his enemies. Cesare's methods were particularly cruel. He personally participated in torture and executions. Alexander VI used papal power to enrich his family. He sold church offices, took bribes for appointments, and confiscated the property of deceased cardinals. Money flowed into the pockets of the Borgia clan, Contemporaries noted that the Pope's greed knew no bounds. He turned the Vatican into a commercial enterprise, where everything was sold and bought. Rumors of poisoning were particularly sinister. The Borgias had a reputation as masters of poisons. When one of the wealthy cardinals or aristocrats died under mysterious circumstances, the Romans whispered that it was the work of the Borgias, a poison called cantarella, allegedly invented by Alexander himself, left no obvious traces and caused symptoms similar to a natural illness. The victim's property went to the papal treasury. On a June night in 1497, an event occurred that became a symbol of the dark era of the Borgias. Giovanni Borgia, Duke of Gandia and the Pope's favorite son, was found dead in the Tiber with 9 stab wounds. Officially, the murder was never solved, but the Romans were sure it was the work of Cesare, who killed his brother out of jealousy and a struggle for influence over his father. Alexander VI wept over his son's body, but never dared to conduct a real investigation. Alexander's ties to the criminal underworld of Rome were well known. He patronized gangs that terrorized the city. In exchange for monetary gifts, the Pope provided criminals with shelter and protection. Under the Borgias, the streets of Rome became a dangerous place where robberies and murders occurred daily. The city guard was subordinate to the Pope's favorites, many of whom were themselves involved in crime. Political intrigue played a special role in Alexander VI's activities. He interfered in the affairs of European kingdoms, selling his support to one side or the other. In 1493, he drew the famous demarcation line dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal. This deal brought him enormous sums of money from both crowns, but also tarnished the papal throne by involving it in the colonial division of the world. Under Alexander VI, the Vatican became a center of debauchery and corruption. The banquets in the papal chambers became increasingly licentious. The scandalous Chestnut Banquet in October 1501 is well known, when 50 courtesans participated in indecent contests before the Pope and his entourage. This episode, documented by the papal master of ceremonies Johann Burchard, shows the complete moral decline at the heart of the Christian world. The death of Alexander VI in August 1503 is shrouded in mystery. Officially, he died of fever, but many of his contemporaries suspected poisoning. Ironically, the master of poisons may have fallen victim to poisoning himself, possibly by accidentally drinking wine intended for someone else. His body quickly decomposed in the August heat, and the funeral was held in haste, without the ceremonies befitting a pope. After Alexander's death, the Church tried to erase his memory. His name was rarely mentioned, and documents detailing his crimes were removed from the archives or destroyed. But it was impossible to completely hide the truth. Too many witnesses had seen what the Vatican had become under the Borgias. But was Alexander VI the only criminal on the papal throne? Or is his story just the most striking example of a systemic problem? The Vatican's financial operations have remained one of the Catholic Church's best-kept secrets for centuries. Behind the facade of spiritual service lay a powerful financial empire that used methods far removed from Christian precepts. The pontiff's banking activities repeatedly intersected with criminal schemes, money laundering, and dubious deals. Official documents conceal the true scale of these operations, but information leaks lift the veil of secrecy. The history of Vatican finances begins in the Middle Ages, when the Church became the largest landowner in Europe. The popes controlled vast territories and received enormous revenues. However, simply accumulating wealth was not enough. Mechanisms for managing capital were needed. This is how the first banking structures arose under the Holy See. As early as the 13th century, popes actively collaborated with Italian banking houses, using them for international financial transactions. The sale of indulgences became one of the Church's most profitable schemes. Officially, this was presented as an opportunity to reduce the time a soul spent in purgatory. But in fact, it turned into a trade in salvation. The popes set prices for various sins, creating a veritable price list. Money flowed into the Vatican treasury in a continuous stream, financing the construction of cathedrals and the luxurious lifestyle of the pontiffs. In the 16th century, Pope Leo X perfected the system of selling indulgences. He needed huge sums of money to complete the construction of St. Peter's Cathedral. Special agents were sent throughout Europe to sell forgiveness of sins. It was this practice that angered Martin Luther and became one of the reasons for the Reformation. But even after the schism in the Christian world, the Vatican did not abandon this lucrative business. The 20th century brought new opportunities for Vatican finances. In 1929, the Institute for Religious Works, known as the Vatican Bank, was established. Officially, its purpose was to manage the funds of religious organizations. But in reality, it became a tool for dubious financial transactions. The bank enjoyed a special status. It was not subject to international financial regulators and could conduct transactions in complete secrecy. After World War II, the Vatican became a refuge for Nazi capital. Huge sums of money looted by the Nazis in occupied countries flowed into the Vatican Bank through secret channels. Gold, jewels, works of art, all found refuge in the basements of the Holy See. Official documents about these operations have either been destroyed or securely hidden in secret archives. American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who headed the Vatican Bank from 1970, played a special role in Vatican finances. This man turned a religious financial institution into a center for money laundering and shady deals. Marcinkus maintained close ties with the Italian mafia and corrupt bankers. His motto was cynical: "You can't run a church on Ave Marias alone." The Vatican's ties to the Sicilian mafia are well documented. Criminal clans used the Vatican Bank to launder proceeds from drug trafficking and other illegal operations. In return, the mafia provided various services to the church, including the elimination of inconvenient witnesses. This relationship existed for decades, bringing enormous benefits to both sides. In the 1980s, a scandal erupted involving Banco Ambrosiano, Italy's largest private bank, which had close ties to the Vatican. When the bank went bankrupt with debts of $1.5 billion, it was revealed that the Vatican Bank was its main shareholder. Depositors' money disappeared into a black hole of offshore accounts and shell companies. The investigation revealed the involvement of the P2 Masonic Lodge and the Italian mafia in the scheme. Banco Ambrosiano chairman Roberto Calvi, nicknamed God's Banker for his ties to the Vatican, was found hanged under Black Monk's Bridge in London in June 1982. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but a lot of evidence pointed to murder. Calvi knew too much about the Vatican's financial shenanigans and was threatening to spill the beans. His death was a warning to others who might talk. The Vatican paid $250 million in compensation to Banco Ambrosiano's creditors, but did not admit guilt. Documents revealing the details of the transactions remained inaccessible. Marcinus was protected from Italian justice by the Vatican's diplomatic immunity. He lived out his days in peace, taking many secrets to his grave. The Vatican's modern financial scandals continue this tradition of secrecy. In 2012, confidential documents known as VatiLeaks were leaked. The letters revealed corruption, nepotism, and financial abuse in the upper echelons of the church. Papal butler Paolo Gabriele, who passed the documents to journalists, was convicted and imprisoned. But how many more secrets are hidden in the Vatican's safes? The history of the papacy has seen periods when the throne of St. Peter was occupied by people whose behavior was contrary to Christian ideals. One of the most scandalous pontiffs was John XII, who reigned from 955 to 964. His rise to power at the age of 18 marked the beginning of an era that historians would call pornocracy, the rule of prostitutes. Documents from that time paint a picture of such moral decline that the Church tried for centuries to erase this page from history. Octavian, as the future pope was actually named, was born around 937 into a noble Roman family. His father, Alberic II, effectively ruled Rome as a dictator. On his deathbed, Alberic forced the Roman nobility to swear that after the death of the current pope, Agapetus II, they would elect Octavian. When Agapetus died in November 955, the young Octavian became pope, taking the name John XII. From the first days of his reign, the new pontiff showed his true colors. The Vatican Palace became a place of constant feasting and orgies. John surrounded himself with young aristocrats who shared his passion for entertainment. Wine flowed freely, and women entered the papal chambers at will. Church services were conducted carelessly or ignored altogether. The Pope preferred hunting and gambling to fulfilling his spiritual duties. Contemporaries left shocking accounts of John's behavior. Bishop Liutprand of Cremona, who visited Rome during those years, wrote that the Pope had turned the Lateran palace into a brothel. John openly cohabited with his mistresses, including the married Stefanata, the widow of Ranieri. It was said that he ordained a 10-year-old boy as a bishop for money, and made a deacon, who was his partner in debauchery, a cardinal. John's financial abuses were no less serious than his moral crimes. He sold church offices left and right, without regard for the qualifications or piety of the buyers. The papal treasury was emptied, as money was spent on feasts, gambling, and gifts to favorites. Jewels and sacred vessels disappeared from churches, turning into coins for dice games. Particularly scandalous were the accusations of violence. Several women accused the Pope of rape. One of them, a widow named Anna, claimed that John had taken her by force in St. Peter's Cathedral itself. Another woman, Stefanida, fled Rome in fear of the Pope. These crimes went unpunished. Who could judge Christ's representative on earth? John's political activities were as disorderly as his personal life. He came into conflict with the powerful Berengar II, King of Italy, who threatened the papal possessions. In desperation, John turned to the German King Otto I for help. In 962, Otto came to Rome, and John crowned him emperor. But this deal brought the Pope more problems than solutions. Soon, John regretted his decision. Otto began to interfere in the administration of Rome, limiting papal power. The young pontiff's character did not tolerate restrictions. He secretly entered into negotiations with the emperor's enemies, effectively betraying his recent ally. When Otto learned of the betrayal, he convened a church council to judge the Pope. In November 963, an unprecedented council was held in Rome. For the first time in history, the Pope appeared before a court of church hierarchs. The list of charges was appalling: sacrilege, adultery, incest, murder, perjury, blasphemy. One after another, witnesses confirmed John's crimes. They said that he had turned the sacred palace into a brothel, that he drank to the devil's health, that he invoked pagan gods while playing dice. John himself refused to appear at the council, sending a defiant letter. He cursed all the participants of the meeting and threatened them with excommunication. But the bishops and cardinals, who had the support of the emperor, were not afraid. They unanimously deposed John and elected a new pope, Leo VIII. For the first time, a sitting pope was deprived of his office during his lifetime. However, the story did not end there. When Otto left Rome, John returned with an armed force. He expelled Leo VIII and brutally dealt with his opponents. Cardinal John, one of the main accusers, was captured and blinded. Other priests were mutilated or killed. The terror continued for several months until a sudden death put an end to John's reign. The circumstances surrounding the death of John XII in May 964 are shrouded in contradictory rumors. Officially, he died of a stroke, but his contemporaries told other versions of the story. Some said that he was beaten by his mistress's husband after catching the Pope in bed with his wife. Others claimed that the devil came for his soul right in the middle of carnal pleasures. Still others whispered about poisoning by avengers of the executed priests. He was only 27 years old. The Church spent centuries trying to erase the memory of John XII. Documents from his reign were destroyed or edited, but it was impossible to completely hide the truth. The story of this pope became a symbol of how the sacred office can be defiled by an unworthy person. The connection between the papacy and secret societies remains one of the most controversial topics in the history of the Vatican. Officially, the Church has always condemned secret organizations, especially Freemasonry, but documents paint a more complex picture. Some pontiffs not only knew about the existence of secret societies within church structures, but also used them to achieve their goals. This double game continued for centuries, leaving traces in the form of mysterious symbols and encrypted messages. The roots of the problem go back to the Middle Ages. The Order of the Knights Templar, created in the 12th century to protect pilgrims, quickly became a powerful financial and military force. The Knights amassed enormous wealth and created a network that spanned the whole of Europe. They were subject only to the Pope, which made them independent of secular authorities. But this independence gave rise to rumors of secret rituals and heretical practices. In the early 14th century, French King Philip IV, who needed the Templars' money, accused the order of heresy. Under torture, the knights confessed to renouncing Christ and committing blasphemous acts. Pope Clement V agreed to dissolve the order in 1312. But many Templars went underground, creating secret cells that preserved the ancient rituals. In the 18th century, a new threat emerged: Freemasonry. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a bull prohibiting Catholics from joining Masonic lodges under threat of excommunication. But the ban did not stop Masonic ideas from penetrating the Church. Documents testify to the existence of lodges within the Vatican itself. In the 20th century, the Masonic Lodge propaganda duo, known as P2, appeared. Created in the 1950s, it brought together politicians, military personnel, businessmen, and church hierarchs. The goal was to establish secret control over Italy. The lodge was headed by Licio Gelli, who had connections in all spheres of power. The list of members discovered in 1981 included Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, head of the Vatican Bank. P2 was involved in a series of terrorist acts in the 1970s and 1980s. The explosion at the Bologna train station in August 1980 was linked to members of the lodge. The Vatican's role in these events remains unclear, but the connections between church hierarchs and the organizers have been documented. There are references to more ancient societies within the Vatican. A group called Entita has allegedly been active since the Renaissance, controlling appointments to key positions. Members of this society recognize each other by special signs and passwords. They hold secret meetings in closed chapels in the Vatican, using ancient rituals. Contemporary investigations point to the continued existence of secret groups in the Vatican. The VatiLeaks scandal in 2012 revealed the existence of closed circles opposed to reform. Documents showed a struggle between different factions for influence over the Pope. Some of these groups use secret society methods to coordinate their actions. The symbolism of secret societies can be found in the architecture and art of the Vatican. Masonic signs, occult symbols, and mysterious images adorn the walls of palaces and churches. Officially, this is explained by the artistic traditions of the era, but researchers see in them traces of the influence of secret organizations. What exactly did the creators of these images want to say? The question of the papacy's connection to secret societies remains open. The Vatican categorically denies any involvement of church hierarchs in Masonic or other secret structures. But leaked documents and insider testimony paint a different picture. Perhaps behind the facade of spiritual authority lies a parallel structure that governs the Church according to its own laws. The Inquisition remains one of the darkest phenomena in the history of the Catholic Church. Officially created to combat heresy, it became an instrument of total control over people's minds and lives. Popes used the Inquisition to eliminate political opponents, suppress dissent, and enrich the Church with the confiscated property of heretics. Documents preserved in the archives testify to the scale of the terror that the Church prefers not to remember. The history of the Inquisition began in the 13th century, when Pope Gregory IX established a special tribunal to combat heresy in 1231. Initially, its target was the Cathars in southern France, a Christian sect that preached dualism and rejected the material world. The Church saw them as a threat to its power. A crusade against the Albigensians began, accompanied by mass killings. The methods of the Inquisition were particularly cruel. Those accused of heresy were arrested without warning, often on the basis of anonymous reports. The investigation was conducted in secret. The accused did not know the names of their accusers or the nature of the charges against them. Torture was used to extract confessions. The Church claimed that torture was a merciful way to save the soul of a heretic through repentance. In 1252, Pope Innocent IV officially authorized the use of torture in cases of heresy. Detailed instructions were developed on which methods were permissible. Stretching on the rack, the Spanish boot, water torture, the Inquisitor's arsenal was constantly expanding. Victims signed any confession just to end the torment, but confession led to the stake. Burning at the stake became a symbol of the Inquisition. The Church did not formally kill heretics. It handed them over to the secular authorities to carry out the sentence. This legal trick allowed the popes to claim that the Church did not shed blood. But it was the inquisitors who handed down death sentences, and the secular authorities merely carried out the will of the Church. Thousands of people died in the fire. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, gained particularly sad notoriety. Its first Grand Inquisitor was Tomás de Torquemada, whose name became synonymous with religious fanaticism. Under him, the Inquisition turned into a state apparatus of terror. Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity under pressure were subjected to constant checks on the sincerity of their faith. The Inquisition became a source of enormous income. The property of convicted heretics was confiscated in favor of the Church and the Crown. This created an incentive for false accusations. Rich people became easy targets. An anonymous denunciation was enough to start an investigation. Even those who were acquitted lost part of their property to cover legal costs. The Inquisition turned into a profitable business. The Papal Inquisition spread throughout Europe. In Italy, Germany, and France, there were tribunals that reported directly to Rome. The inquisitors wielded enormous power. They could arrest anyone, including bishops and princes. Their decisions were final. An atmosphere of fear paralyzed society. People were afraid to express their thoughts for fear of being denounced. It was not only heretics who were persecuted. The Inquisition fought witches, sorcerers, and anyone suspected of having ties to the devil. The Hammer of Witches, a guide to identifying and punishing witches, written by inquisitors in 1486, became the basis for mass trials. Tens of thousands of women were accused of witchcraft and burned. Many of them were healers, or simply lonely old women. The Inquisition also persecuted scientists. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600 for his ideas about the infinity of the universe. Galileo Galilei was forced to renounce the heliocentric system of the world in 1633 under threat of torture. The Church feared scientific progress, seeing it as a threat to its power over minds. It was not until the 19th century that the Inquisition began to lose its power. The secularization of European societies and the spread of Enlightenment ideas undermined the power of the Church. In 1834, the Spanish Inquisition was finally abolished. But in the Vatican, the tribunal continued to exist under the name of the Sacred Congregation of the Roman and Universal Inquisition. In the 20th century, the organization was given a more neutral name, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It no longer burns heretics at the stake, but continues to control church doctrine. Theologians whose views do not conform to official doctrine are investigated and may be deprived of their right to teach. The methods have become milder, but the goal remains the same: control over the minds of believers. The story of the Ambrosiano Bank became one of the biggest financial scandals of the 20th century, directly linked to the Vatican. This Italian bank, named after Saint Ambrose of Milan, was closely intertwined with the Vatican Bank and was used for dubious financial transactions. When the bank collapsed in 1982 with a debt of $1.5 billion, an investigation began that led to murders, international scandals, and the disclosure of links between the Vatican, the mafia, and the P2 Masonic Lodge. Banco Ambrosiano was founded in 1896 as a Catholic bank, serving mainly church organizations. For decades, it operated as a solid financial institution. The situation changed in the 1960s when Roberto Calvi became chairman. This ambitious banker established close ties with Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who headed the Vatican Bank. Calvi and Marcinkus created a complex scheme of financial transactions through offshore companies. The Vatican Bank became the owner of shell companies registered in Panama, Liechtenstein, and the Bahamas. Huge sums of money were pumped through these companies. Officially, these were investments, but in fact, the money was used to launder criminal capital and for illegal political operations. Roberto Calvi earned the nickname God's Banker because of his close ties to the Vatican. He regularly met with senior church officials and enjoyed their patronage. The Vatican Bank was the main shareholder of Banco Ambrosiano, which created an appearance of reliability. Customers trusted the bank, unaware that their money was involved in dubious schemes. The Propaganda du Masonic Lodge was involved in Calvi's operations. Its head, Licio Gelli, coordinated financial flows between the bank, the Vatican, and criminal structures. Banco Ambrosiano financed anti-communist operations in Latin America, arms supplies to dictatorial regimes, and the activities of terrorist groups in Italy. Money flowed in different directions, leaving a confusing trail. The Sicilian mafia actively used Banco Ambrosiano to launder proceeds from drug trafficking. Godfather Michele Sindona, who had connections with both the mafia and the Vatican, was the middleman in these operations. When his own bank collapsed in the 1970s, an investigation began that could have uncovered the entire scheme. Sindona was poisoned in prison in 1986, taking many secrets to his grave. By the early 1980s, the Banco Ambrosiano pyramid scheme had reached critical proportions. The hole in the balance sheet was over $1 billion. Calvi desperately tried to save the situation by asking the Vatican for help, but the church hierarchy began to distance itself from the scandal. Marcinus refused to meet, and the Vatican Bank denied responsibility for the debts. In May 1982, the Italian authorities launched an investigation into the activities of Banco Ambrosiano. Calvi was arrested, but soon released on bail. He realized that he knew too much and that his life was in danger. The banker gathered compromising information on his partners, hoping to use it for his defense. In his briefcase were documents that could shake the Vatican. On June 7, Calvi fled Italy. He used a fake passport and a complicated route through Austria and the United Kingdom. In London, he met with several people in an attempt to negotiate protection, but the negotiations were unsuccessful. On June 18, Roberto Calvi's body was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. The police initially ruled the death a suicide, but the circumstances raised questions. Calvi's pockets were filled with stones and bricks, and there was a rope around his neck attached to scaffolding under the bridge. His hands were tied behind his back. How could a person hang himself like that? The family insisted on a murder investigation. 20 years later, an Italian court ruled that Calvi had been murdered. Members of the Sicilian mafia were charged with the murder, acting on orders from someone else. But who exactly ordered the murder remained unclear. The clues led to the Masonic Lodge P2 and to the Vatican itself. Calvi knew too much about the Church's financial machinations, and his death was beneficial to many. After the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, lawsuits began. The Vatican paid $250 million to creditors without admitting legal liability. It was a price for silence. Archbishop Marcinkus avoided trial thanks to diplomatic immunity. He remained head of the Vatican Bank until 1989, after which he quietly retired to America. The story of the destruction of the Knights Templar remains one of the most controversial episodes in the relationship between the papacy and secular power. At the beginning of the 14th century, a powerful military order, subordinate only to the Pope, was accused of heresy and disbanded. The official version states that the Knights Templar did indeed perform blasphemous rituals, but documents point to a more prosaic reason. The French king wanted to seize their wealth, and Pope Clement V was unable or unwilling to oppose him. The order was founded in 1119 to protect pilgrims to the Holy Land. 9 French knights, led by Hugues de Payens, took a vow of poverty and obedience. They settled on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and were given the name Templars. In 1128, Pope Honorius II officially recognized the order, granting it special privileges. Over 2 centuries, the Templars became a powerful force. They created a network of fortresses throughout Europe and became owners of vast lands. The order was involved in banking, granting loans to kings and aristocrats. The Knights effectively became the first international bankers, and their financial power aroused the envy of rulers. The French king, Philip IV the Fair, was constantly in need of money. He had already expelled the Jewish moneylenders, confiscating their property. Now the king's attention turned to the Templars. Philip's agents infiltrated the order, gathering compromising evidence. Gradually, a list of accusations was compiled: renunciation of Christ, spitting on the cross, worship of the idol Baphomet, and sodomy. Pope Clement V was the king's puppet. Elected in 1305 thanks to Philip's support, he moved the throne from Rome to Avignon. Clement was completely dependent and could not resist the king's will. When Philip demanded the destruction of the Templars, the Pope did not dare to refuse. On Friday, October 13, 1307, hundreds of Templars were arrested simultaneously throughout France. The operation was carried out in strict secrecy. Grand Master Jacques de Molay was captured in Paris. Interrogations began, accompanied by brutal torture. Under torture, many knights confessed to the charges against them. Under torture, Jacques de Molay confessed that when he joined the order, he was forced to renounce Christ 3 times and spit on the cross. Other knights spoke of worshipping a mysterious bearded head that possessed magical powers. These confessions, obtained under torture, formed the basis of the prosecution, although their reliability is highly questionable. At the Church Council in Vienne in 1311, a decision was made to dissolve the order. Clement issued a bull abolishing the Templars, not because of proven guilt, but for reasons of expediency. It was a legal trick that allowed the king to avoid formal condemnation but achieve the desired result. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and 3 other leaders of the order were burned at the stake in Paris. Before his death, the Grand Master publicly renounced his confessions, stating that they had been made under torture. He cursed the king and the Pope, predicting their imminent death. Surprisingly, both died within a year. The Templars' property was supposed to pass to another military order, the Hospitallers, but in fact, most of the wealth was seized by King Philip. Gold, land, castles, everything went to the royal treasury. The Pope received only a small share. The destruction of the Templars was a grand robbery, covered up by religious accusations. Many historians believe that the accusations against the Templars were fabricated. The order's rituals were indeed secret, but that did not mean heresy. Perhaps the ceremonies included symbolic elements that were distorted beyond recognition under torture. The real reason for the destruction was the king's greed and the Pope's weakness. Clement V's role in this story is particularly shameful. He betrayed an order that had served the Church for 2 centuries. The Pope sacrificed the Templars in order to preserve his own power and please the king. This story shows how far the pontiffs could go in compromising with secular power. The Vatican's relations with the fascist regimes of the 20th century represent one of the darkest chapters in the history of the papacy. Officially, the Church condemned totalitarianism, but documents testify to the complex cooperation between the Holy See and the dictators of Europe. Pope Pius XI, and especially his successor, Pius XII, pursued a policy that can be described as a pragmatic compromise with the forces of evil. The price of this compromise was measured in millions of human lives. The story begins in Italy in the 1920s. Benito Mussolini came to power in 1922, promising to restore order and revive the glory of Rome. Since 1870, the Vatican had been in conflict with the Italian state over the loss of the Papal States. Mussolini proposed a solution, the Lateran Treaty, which created the independent state of the Vatican and gave the Church significant privileges. On February 11, 1929, Pope Pius XI and Mussolini signed the treaty. The Vatican gained sovereignty, financial compensation, and special status in Italy. Catholicism became the state religion. In return, the Church recognized the fascist state and pledged not to interfere in politics. The Pope called Mussolini the man sent to us by Providence. In Germany, the situation developed in a similar way. After Hitler came to power in 1933, the Vatican quickly concluded a concordat with the Nazis. On July 20th of that year, Cardinal Pacelli, the future Pius XII, signed an agreement guaranteeing the rights of the Catholic Church in exchange for political loyalty. The agreement gave legitimacy to Hitler's regime. Pope Pius XI tried to balance condemnation of Nazism with maintaining relations with Germany. In 1937, he issued the encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, criticizing the Nazis' racial ideology. The document was read in German churches, provoking the regime's anger. However, there were no real consequences for relations between the Vatican and the Third Reich. When Pius XI died in 1939, he was succeeded by Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who took the name Pius XII. The new pope was known for his Germanophile views and diplomatic experience working in Germany. His policies during World War II are still controversial today. Why did Pius XII remain silent about the Holocaust? The Pope knew about the mass murder of Jews from the very beginning. Information came from bishops, priests, and diplomats. The Vatican had detailed information about concentration camps and gas chambers. But Pius XII did not publicly condemn the genocide. His Christmas messages contained only vague references to the suffering of the innocent. The Pope's defenders argue that public condemnation would only have worsened the situation of the victims and endangered Catholics in the occupied countries. But critics point out that the Pope's silence gave the Nazis moral cover. When the spiritual leader of millions of people does not condemn the greatest crime in history, it is perceived as tacit approval. In Croatia, the Catholic Church was directly involved in the genocide. The Ustasha regime, led by Ante Pavelic, carried out mass killings of Serbs, Jews, and Roma. Franciscan priests participated in the massacre, blessing the killers. Archbishop Aloysius Stepinac supported the regime. The Vatican knew what was happening, but did not take decisive action. After the war, the Vatican helped many Nazi criminals escape justice. Through so-called ratlines, war criminals obtained documents and were smuggled to South America. Priests issued Red Cross passports and organized escapes. Adolf Eichmann, Klaus Barbie, Josef Mengele, all of them took advantage of the help of church structures. In Spain, the church supported Francisco Franco's regime from the very beginning of the Civil War. Franco declared his rebellion a crusade against the Republicans and Communists. Catholic bishops blessed his troops. After his victory in 1939, Franco established a clerical fascist dictatorship. The church was given a privileged position and control over education. The Vatican also supported the Salazar regime in Portugal. This Catholic dictator ruled from 1932, creating a corporate state. The church had enormous influence, and dissent was suppressed by the secret police. The popes considered Salazar an exemplary Catholic ruler, ignoring the repression and poverty of the population. It was only after the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s that the church began to rethink its attitude toward democracy and human rights. But the memory of its collaboration with the fascists remained a stain on the Vatican's reputation. How many lives could have been saved if the popes had shown more courage? After the fall of the Third Reich, thousands of Nazi war criminals fled Europe to escape justice. Many of them found refuge and assistance in the most unexpected place, within the structures of the Catholic Church. The operation, known as monastery, was a system of ratlines through which SS officers, Gestapo agents, and collaborators were smuggled to South America. The Vatican's role in these operations was long hushed up, but declassified documents reveal the extent of the Church's involvement. One of the main escape routes was organized by Croatian priest Kristo Draganović. This Franciscan worked at the Vatican's College of St. Jerome in Rome and had access to high church circles. Draganović created a network that helped Croatian Ustasha members escape punishment for genocide. Gradually, German Nazis also began to use his services. The scheme was simple but effective. Fugitives arrived in Italy with forged documents or illegally. They found refuge in monasteries and seminaries, where priests hid them from the authorities. Then Draganović and his assistants issued international Red Cross documents that allowed them to obtain visas and ship tickets. The final destination was usually Argentina, where the Perón regime willingly accepted Nazis. The Vatican officially denies direct involvement in the operation, but evidence suggests otherwise. High-ranking church hierarchs knew about the rat trails and protected them. Pope Pius XII personally met with Draganović and approved of his activities. The Vatican viewed helping anti-communists, even if they were war criminals, as part of the fight against Soviet influence. Adolf Eichmann, one of the main organizers of the Holocaust, fled Europe via the Vatican route. After the war, he hid in Germany under a false name. In 1950, Eichmann obtained a Red Cross passport in the name of Riccardo Clement through a Franciscan priest in Genoa. He sailed to Argentina and lived there until his arrest by Israeli intelligence in 1960. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, responsible for the torture and murder of members of the French resistance, also took advantage of the Church's help. American intelligence used Barbie as an informant on communists and then helped him escape. Priests arranged documents for him, and in 1951 he moved to Bolivia, where he served as an advisor to dictatorial regimes. Franz Stangl, commandant of the Sobibor and Treblinka death camps, where about 900,000 people died, fled via Rome with the help of Bishop Alois Hudal. This Austrian prelate openly sympathized with Nazism and considered it his duty to help the victims of the victors. Hudal personally issued letters of recommendation to the fugitives and arranged meetings with Vatican officials. Bishop Hudal did not act alone. There was a whole network of priests and monks involved in smuggling Nazis. Monasteries served as transit points. There, fugitives could wait out the danger and obtain new clothes and documents. The abbots of the monasteries received funding from mysterious sources, possibly from gold looted by the Nazis. Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death from Auschwitz, who conducted horrific medical experiments, also fled through Italy. In 1949, he obtained a Red Cross passport in Genoa and sailed to Argentina. He lived there for several years, then moved to Paraguay and Brazil. Mengele escaped justice and died of natural causes in 1979. Ante Pavelić, leader of the Croatian Ustaša, responsible for the murder of hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies, found refuge in the Vatican. He lived in Rome under the protection of the Church for several years. When the danger of arrest increased, Pavelić moved to Argentina with the help of Vatican channels. He died in Spain in 1959, never having been brought to justice. In addition to individual criminals, church channels were used to transfer entire groups of collaborators. Latvian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian nationalists who had served the Nazis fled en masse to the West. Many of them were guilty of war crimes, but the Vatican saw them as allies against communism. The Vatican's motives were complex. On the one hand, the Church traditionally gave refuge to the persecuted without asking unnecessary questions. On the other hand, helping the Nazis was a conscious choice in favor of anti-communism. The Vatican feared the spread of Soviet influence more than it regretted the crimes of the Nazis. This logic justified saving murderers. It was only at the end of the 20th century that documents about the rat trails began to be declassified. The Vatican acknowledged that some priests helped the Nazis, but claims that these were personal initiatives that were not officially approved. However, the scale of the operation and the involvement of high-ranking hierarchs suggest otherwise. How many criminals escaped punishment thanks to the Church? The Vatican's ties to organized crime go back a long way, but they became especially close in the 20th century. The Sicilian mafia, the Neapolitan Camorra, and other criminal groups maintained relationships with church structures at all levels, from parish priests to cardinals. These ties were mutually beneficial. The Church received financial support and political influence, while the mafia gained legitimacy and protection. Documents attest to cases where church hierarchs were directly involved in criminal operations. The story begins in Sicily, where the mafia and the Catholic Church have coexisted for centuries. Mafia clans controlled the countryside, while the Church controlled the spiritual life of the population. Godfathers were devout Catholics who generously donated to the construction of churches. Priests baptized the children of mafiosi, married them, and buried those killed in mafia wars. This intertwining created an atmosphere of tacit approval of criminal activity. After World War II, the mafia strengthened its influence in Italy. The American occupation authorities used criminal structures to fight the communists. The Christian Democratic Party, closely associated with the Church, collaborated with the mafia to secure electoral victories. The votes of the territories controlled by the clans reliably went to Catholic politicians. The Vatican turned a blind eye to these ties in the name of fighting the Red Menace. In the 1970s, the mafia began to actively engage in drug trafficking. Sicilian clans established control over the heroin route from Turkey to America via Italy. Huge profits required laundering, and Vatican banking structures came to the rescue. The Vatican Bank and associated Italian banks became channels for the legalization of criminal capital. A key figure in these operations was Michele Sindona, a banker with dual ties. He worked with both the Vatican and the mafia. Sindona managed several banks through which money from drug trafficking was pumped. He was close to Archbishop Marcinkus and enjoyed his patronage. When Sindona's banking empire collapsed in 1974, an investigation revealed the extent of the links between finance, the mafia, and the Vatican. Sindona was arrested and convicted of bank fraud. While in prison, he began to testify about his ties to the mafia and the Church. This was dangerous. Too many influential people were involved in his affairs. On March 18, 1986, Sindona was found dead in his cell after drinking coffee laced with cyanide. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. but everyone understood that he had been eliminated.
The murder of papal banker Roberto Calvi in 1982 was also linked to the mafia.
The investigation revealed that the perpetrators were members of Sicilian clans who feared exposure.
Calvi knew about financial transactions linking the Vatican, the mafia,
and the P2 Masonic Lodge. His death served as a warning to others who might speak out. In the 1980s, the Italian authorities launched a large-scale offensive against the mafia.
The Maxi trial in Palermo
Tried hundreds of mafiosi. Judge Giovanni Falcone and prosecutor Paolo Borsellino led the fight against organized crime. They uncovered many links between clans, politicians, and businessmen.
But connections with the church remained a taboo subject.
In May 1992, Giovanni Falcone was killed by a powerful explosion on a highway near Palermo. 2 months later, Paolo Borsellino was also killed in an explosion.
The mafia showed that it was prepared to do anything to protect its interests.
These murders shocked Italy, but did not lead to the disclosure of all the links between criminal groups and the authorities. Modern investigations continue to reveal links between the church and organized crime. The Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, Italy's most powerful mafia structure, actively uses religious rituals. Initiation into the clan includes oaths before images of saints.
'Ndrangheta bosses donate generously to the church and consider themselves good Catholics.
Attempts by the church to distance itself from the mafia are hampered by deeply rooted ties. Many priests in southern Italy grew up in an environment where the mafia was part of everyday life. They baptize the children of mafiosi, accept their donations, and participate in their funerals.
Breaking these ties would mean opposing powerful forces.
In 2014, Pope Francis publicly excommunicated members of the mafia from the church. It was an unprecedented move, demonstrating the Vatican's willingness to break with the criminal world.
But the pontiff's words did not change the reality on the ground.
Mafiosi continue to consider themselves Catholics, and many priests continue to interact with them. How deeply has organized crime penetrated church structures?
The scandals that rocked the Catholic Church in the late 20th and early 21st centuries
revealed systemic problems that the Vatican had hidden from the public for decades. Sexual crimes committed by priests against children, financial fraud, leaks of secret documents. All this showed that behind the facade of spirituality lies an institution riddled with corruption. Attempts by popes to carry out reforms were met with resistance from entrenched power structures. Can the Church cleanse itself of its own sins? The most shocking scandal involved the sexual abuse of children by clergy. The first cases began to surface in the 1980s, but the true scale of the problem only became apparent in the early 2000s. Investigations in the US, Ireland, Australia, and other countries revealed thousands of cases of pedophilia among priests.
Even more frightening was the fact that the church hierarchy systematically covered up for the perpetrators.
Bishops transferred pedophile priests from parish to parish, hiding their crimes from the authorities.
Victims were threatened
and forced to remain silent. Documents were destroyed. For a long time, the Vatican denied the problem, calling the accusations slander and anti-Catholic propaganda. Only when the scale of the scandal became impossible to ignore did the Church begin to admit guilt. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, headed the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and knew about many cases. Documents show that he personally made decisions about the transfer of criminal priests. When Ratzinger became Pope in 2005, he promised to eradicate pedophilia in the Church, but the actual measures taken were insufficient. In Ireland, an investigation revealed decades of systematic abuse in Catholic schools and orphanages. Thousands of children were subjected to physical and sexual abuse. The Archbishop of Dublin covered up for the criminals for years. The Murphy Commission report in 2009 described a horrific picture of collusion between the Church and the authorities to cover up the crimes. Financial scandals also continued.
In 2010,
Italian police launched an investigation into money laundering through the Vatican Bank. 23 million euros were frozen in accounts. It turned out that the bank was violating international anti-money laundering rules. The Vatican was forced to take measures to increase the transparency of financial transactions. The Vatileaks scandal in 2012 was a blow to Pope Benedict. His personal valet, Paolo Gabriele, handed over hundreds of confidential documents to journalists. The letters revealed internal struggles within the Vatican, corruption, and intrigues among the cardinals. The Pope appeared powerless in the face of the conspirators surrounding him. The documents showed the existence of a gay lobby among high-ranking church officials. A group of cardinals and bishops leading secret homosexual lives were vulnerable to blackmail. They were used by various groups to achieve political goals within the Vatican. The hypocrisy was obvious. The Church publicly condemned homosexuality, but tolerated it within its ranks. In February 2013, Pope Benedict took an unprecedented step. He abdicated the throne. The official reason given was his age and poor health. But many believed that the real reason was his inability to cope with the Vatican's internal problems. The Pope was tired of fighting corruption and intrigue. His successor, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, who took the name Francis, promised radical reforms. The new pope spoke of the mafia in the Vatican and the need to clean up the church. He created a commission to combat sexual abuse, began financial reforms, and called for greater openness. But resistance to change was enormous. In 2018, a new scandal erupted. Archbishop Theodore McCarrick, one of the most influential American cardinals, was accused of years of sexual abuse of seminarians. It turned out that his behavior had been known in the Vatican for decades, but he continued to pursue his career. McCarrick was defrocked, the first cardinal to be punished so severely for such crimes. Pope Francis's financial reforms also met with resistance. Attempts to bring order to the Vatican Bank and other financial institutions were met with sabotage by officials who did not want to lose control over cash flows. Several high-ranking clergymen were accused of financial misconduct, but real punishment was rare. The death of Pope John Paul I remains one of the most mysterious pages in the modern history of the Vatican. Albino Luciani ruled for only 33 days, from August 26 to September 28, 1978. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the circumstances surrounding his death raise many questions. No autopsy was performed, witnesses gave contradictory testimony, and documents disappeared. Many researchers believe that the Pope was killed to prevent the reforms he planned to carry out. Albino Luciani came from a poor family. He started out as a simple parish priest and rose through the ranks to become Patriarch of Venice. Luciani was known for his modesty, kindness, and desire for justice. When he was elected Pope, many saw him as a man capable of cleansing the Church of corruption. He took the double name John Paul in honor of his predecessors, symbolizing continuity and renewal. From the first days of his pontificate, John Paul I showed that he intended to act decisively. He refused a lavish coronation, opting for a simple inauguration. He spoke in simple language, rejecting complex theological formulas. The Pope began to study the Vatican's financial affairs and was shocked by the scale of the abuses. He learned of the Vatican Bank's ties to the mafia and the P2 Masonic Lodge. Luciani compiled a list of changes he planned to make. He intended to remove Archbishop Marcinkus from his position as head of the Vatican Bank. He wanted to sever ties with questionable financial partners, including Roberto Calvi and Michele Sindona. The Pope also planned to reassign several influential cardinals linked to corruption schemes. These plans made him many enemies. On the evening of September 28th, the Pope was working in his chambers. He was preparing a speech in which he was going to announce personnel changes. On the morning of September 29, a nun who brought the Pope his coffee found him dead in bed. He was holding some papers in his hands. The Vatican immediately began to spread contradictory information about what had happened. Initial reports said that the Pope had been found by his secretary, not a nun. This was strange. Why was it necessary to hide who exactly had discovered the body? Then the information about what the Pope was holding in his hands changed. First they said it was a religious book, then documents. These inconsistencies raised suspicions. The Vatican refused to perform an autopsy, citing the inviolability of the papal body. This was a violation of even canon law in cases of sudden death. The body was immediately embalmed, making further investigation impossible. The documents the Pope was holding disappeared. Lucani's personal belongings were hastily packed and sent to his family. The doctor who examined the body was not the papal physician. He just happened to be nearby. No medical report with a signature and seal was drawn up. The cause of death, myocardial infarction, was announced without any evidence. Lucani had no history of heart disease, although the Vatican later tried to claim otherwise. British journalist David Yellop conducted an investigation and published a book in 1984 entitled In the Name of God. He gathered evidence that the Pope had been poisoned with digitalis, a poison that causes symptoms of a heart attack. Yallop pointed to a circle of suspects that included high-ranking Vatican officials involved in financial fraud. The motives for the murder were obvious. John Paul I's reforms threatened the interests of too many influential people. Marcinus's removal would mean an investigation into the Vatican Bank's financial transactions. The break with Calvi and Sindona threatened to expose links with the mafia. Reshuffles in the Curia would deprive entrenched factions of power. Many had reasons to wish for the Pope's death. There is evidence that John Paul received threats. Several people warned him of danger, but the Pope refused to believe that such a crime could be committed in the Vatican. His naivety cost him his life. The killers acted quickly and professionally, leaving no clues. The Vatican categorically denies the murder theory. The official position is that the Pope died of natural causes. But the refusal to perform an autopsy, contradictions in testimony, and the disappearance of documents all fuel suspicion. Why is the Church so afraid of the truth about the death of John Paul I? What exactly are those who may have been involved in his death hiding? The disappearance and destruction of documents in the Vatican has a long tradition. For centuries, popes and their entourage carefully controlled what information should be preserved for posterity and what should be erased from history. Fires in archives, accidental losses, deliberate destruction. All of this was used to eliminate inconvenient evidence. In the modern era, new technologies for concealing information have been added to these methods. The most famous case of mass destruction of documents was the fire of 1527. During the sacking of Rome by the troops of Emperor Charles V, many Vatican archives were destroyed. Officially, this was a consequence of the chaos of war. But some historians believe that the fire was deliberately set to destroy compromising materials from the Renaissance. In the 19th century, when the Papal States were fighting for their existence, many documents were taken out of Rome and hidden. Some of them never returned to the official archives. Perhaps they contained information about financial transactions or political intrigues that the Church did not want to preserve for history. Documents relating to the Second World War were subject to particularly thorough filtering. When the archives of the pontificate of Pius XII were partially opened in 2020, researchers discovered numerous gaps. Entire periods are sparsely represented. Some documents have clearly been removed, and others show signs of editing. What exactly did the Vatican want to hide about the Pope's role during the war years? Of particular interest are documents about the Vatican's ties to the Nazis after the war. The rat trails along which war criminals fled were organized by church structures. There must be lists of fugitives, financial documents, and correspondence. But these materials are not available to researchers. The Vatican claims that many documents have been lost, but this is doubtful. The case of John Paul I is shrouded in secrecy. Medical records, if they ever existed, have disappeared. The documents that the Pope was holding in his hands at the moment of his death have vanished without a trace. Records of his last meetings and conversations are unavailable. It seems as if all traces of what happened in the last days of his life have been deliberately erased. The VatiLeaks scandal showed that even in the digital age, the Vatican continues to practice concealing documents. Paolo Gabriele was able to take out only a small portion of the compromising materials. After his arrest in 2012, a purge was carried out. Many documents were destroyed, and computer files were deleted. The Vatican did not want any new leaks. There is a practice of creating two versions of documents, an official one for the archives and a secret one for internal use. The official version can be heavily edited or even completely rewritten. The secret version is stored in special repositories with restricted access. This allows the Vatican to control the historical narrative. Insiders talk about the existence of black archives, collections of documents that do not officially exist. They contain materials about the darkest secrets of the papacy, political assassinations, financial crimes, and ties to organized crime. Only a few people bound by an oath of absolute silence have access to these archives. The digitization of archives has created new opportunities for both preserving and destroying information. The Vatican is actively digitizing its collections, but the process is carefully controlled. Only selected documents are scanned, and the most secret materials remain in paper form. Digital files can be deleted without a trace, unlike physical documents. Attempts by independent researchers to gain access to closed materials invariably encounter bureaucratic obstacles. Requests are ignored or rejected on formal grounds. When access is finally granted, researchers find that key documents are temporarily unavailable or undergoing restoration. Journalists attempting to investigate Vatican's secrets face threats and pressure. Their sources within the Vatican are persecuted. Some investigators have reported computer hacking and surveillance. The Vatican uses both legal and extra-legal methods to protect its secrets. The question remains, how many more documents were destroyed, and what secrets did they contain? The history of the Church might look very different if all the facts were known, but the Vatican continues its policy of secrecy, arguing that some things are better left hidden for the good of the Church and the faithful. But whose interests does this secrecy really protect? History knows many people who tried to tell the truth about the dark side of the Vatican. Some were priests and monks, others were journalists and researchers. They had one thing in common. They all faced harsh consequences for their courage. Some were physically eliminated, others were broken morally, and still others were silenced through threats and blackmail. The fates of these people serve as a grim reminder of how far the Vatican is willing to go to protect its secrets. Father Hans Küng, a Swiss theologian, criticized the dogma of papal infallibility in the 1970s. His books questioned many aspects of church doctrine. In 1979, the Vatican stripped him of his right to teach Catholic theology. Küng continued to work, but his influence was significantly limited. This served as a warning to other theologians. Archbishop Emmanuel Malingo of Zambia spoke openly about the existence of Satanists in the Vatican. In the 1990s, he claimed that secret groups practicing occult rituals were active in the upper echelons of the Church. Malingo was recalled from Africa and effectively expelled from the Church after he got married. His accusations were dismissed as delusional, but many questions remained unanswered. Journalist Mino Pecorelli published articles in his magazine about the Vatican's ties to the P2 Masonic Lodge. He had lists of lodge members, including the names of high-ranking priests. On March 20, 1979, Pecorelli was shot dead in his car in Rome. The murder was never solved, but everyone understood that it was revenge for the revelations. Roberto Calvi and Michele Sindona can also be considered people who knew too much. Both tried to use their knowledge for protection or trade, but both were eliminated. Their deaths showed that even the most powerful people are not safe if they threaten to reveal Vatican secrets. Paolo Gabriele, Pope Benedict's valet, decided to tell the world about corruption in the Vatican. He gave journalists thousands of documents, hoping that public pressure would force the Church to reform. Instead, Gabriele was arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. Although the Pope pardoned him, the valet's life was ruined. Monsignor Carlo Maria Vigano, former papal nuncio to the United States, published a letter in 2018 accusing Pope Francis. He claimed that the pontiff knew about Cardinal McCarrick's crimes and covered them up. Vigano also wrote about the existence of a deep state in the Vatican that was opposed to reform. He was declared a troublemaker and a schismatic. Journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi published 2 books based on leaks from the Vatican, Sua Santità in 2012 and Greed in 2015, revealed financial scandals and internal intrigues. Nuzzi was prosecuted, although he was ultimately acquitted. His sources were subjected to repression. Historian Hubert Wolff, who gained access to part of the closed archives, wrote about the systematic destruction of compromising documents. His work showed that the official history of the papacy differs greatly from reality. Wolff faced pressure from church circles and restricted access to materials. Father Gabriele Amorth, the Vatican's chief exorcist until his death in 2016, spoke of the infiltration of evil into the highest echelons of the Church. He claimed that satanic sects were operating within the Vatican and that some cardinals were participating in black masses. These statements were dismissed as the exaggerations of an old priest, but they added another layer of mystery. The fate of these individuals shows that the Vatican will not forgive those who try to reveal its secrets. The methods may vary, from physical elimination to moral destruction, but the goal is the same. The Church protects its secrets at all costs. Those who dare to challenge this system of silence pay a high price. Modern technology makes it more difficult to completely conceal information. Leaks can occur through digital channels, and documents can be copied and distributed instantly. But the Vatican is adapting, using cybersecurity and legal pressure to suppress revelations. The struggle between secrecy and truth continues. The question remains, how many more people hold dangerous knowledge about the Vatican? How many priests, officials, and insiders know the truth but remain silent out of fear? And who will be the next to dare to reveal what the Church is desperately trying to hide? History shows that there are always brave souls for whom the truth is more important than personal safety.